It is prophesied concerning the Lord Jesus that when he rules the world, he will rule with a rod of iron. But all worldly leaders are driven by politics, are driven by convenience, are driven by compromise, balancing righteousness with their own survival. And so Pontius Pilate, knowing that Jesus was innocent, still condemned him to death so that he could save his job. And the same thing is happening with Felix and Festus in Acts chapter 25-26. They fully knew that Paul had not done anything wrong, but they were charged with maintaining peace in Judea, in Israel, and the Jews were adamantly determined that Paul should be executed even as Jesus was executed. And so they refused to make a decision on the matter, holding Paul in custody, treating him nicely and protecting him from the Jews, but not vindicating him. And of course the Jews were not satisfied. As soon as Festus came to power, they demanded that Paul be brought back to Jerusalem so that they could assassinate him, on the pretense that they would judge him according to their law. But even Festus came to realize that Paul had not done anything worthy of chains, and fully knew he couldn't trust the Jews to do what was right. And when Paul appealed to Caesar, he saw an out and agreed, but he didn't have any charges to write. It really was a political standoff. He needed advice from Caesar as to how to deal with these Christians when there was so much opposition to them. But they were not breaking any laws. In fact, there's an archaeological site in Caesarea where Jesus' teaching on rendering to Caesar, on paying your taxes, is etched in the stone. Rome was using Jesus' teaching to get people to pay their taxes. And later, Caesars would make the ruling. If Christians are denounced, then you'll have to investigate them, but don't go seeking them out. But we're not up to that at this point in time. Paul has appealed to Caesar. Would Caesar make the right judgment? Would he stand by righteousness over political expediency? Does he have that much power? Or is he also insecure in his position? Because it's only one who is absolutely secure in their position who can stand by righteousness all the time. Jesus, the Son of God, was absolutely secure. He knew that if he was crucified, and he would be crucified, he was laying down his life to take it again. He was submitting to them, but they would not have the final word. Paul is to go to Rome to face Caesar, and we read from Acts chapter 27. When it was decided that we should sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustan regiment. So entering a ship of Adramyttium, we put to sea, meaning to sail along the coasts of Asia. Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, was with us, and the next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty to go to his friends and receive care. When he had put to sea there, we sailed under the shelter of Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea, which is of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy, and he put us on board. When we had sailed slowly many days, and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus, the wind not permitting us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmone. Passing it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near the city of Lasea. Now, when much time had been spent, and sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. And because the harbour was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also, if by any means we could reach Phoenix, a harbour of Crete opening toward the southwest and northwest, and winter there. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together from the first part of Acts chapter 27. Luke again uses the inclusive term us, we. As Paul goes to Rome, he is accompanied by Luke and Aristarchus, a man from Thessalonica. Several men had gone to Judea with Paul, including Luke. So Luke has spent a full 2 years with Paul in Caesarea, during which time he worked closely with Mark and wrote the Gospel of Luke. Now he is proceeding with Paul to Rome, and we have a detailed account of the trip that they undertook. When we read Corinthians, that was written a couple of years earlier, we find that Paul had had a very adventurous life. 3 times I was beaten with rods, once I was stoned, 3 times I was shipwrecked, a night and a day I have been in the deep, in journeys often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils of the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. And so he was a very experienced traveller. He'd already been shipwrecked 3 times. He didn't want it to happen all over again. He had great wisdom in practical things as well as spiritual things. And so his advice when this journey was so delayed because of the bad autumn weather, it was time to hunker down for winter. His advice was, you're safe here. Yes, it's not the most comfortable place despite its name, but we're safe here, stay here. It's not safe to go on. If we do go on, we risk the cargo, the ship, and our own lives. He's not quoting the Lord in saying, the Lord has said we're all going to die, but he is quoting his experience, saying this journey will end in disaster and much loss. It's foolish to go on. But the centurion trusts the helmsman and the owner of the ship. They presumably have more to lose, at least the owner does. But then maybe the owner is driven by unrealistic expectations because he needs the money that comes from delivering the cargo. He doesn't have the wisdom and the independence that Paul has in this matter. And the majority of people, thinking of their comfort, this harbour's not suitable to winter in, advise that we try and get to another harbour on Crete that would be more congenial for them. In our lives, some decisions we can make ourselves, and some decisions are made for us. For the decisions we make ourselves, we need always to seek God's wisdom. As James says, if you have a plan to go to a city, pray that the Lord will that these things be done. And always condition your experience on what God wills, because God has a plan, and that may not be what you expect. Sometimes what happens is based on the decision of others. And here we have a democratic decision. The majority vote that we proceed, but the majority is not always right. Often, Christians who have wisdom from God will be a minority, but will have the best advice, as it was in this case. At this stage of the journey, the centurion follows the lead of the helmsman and the owner. But as the journey comes to an end, the owner will have lost his ship and his cargo. The centurion will take advice from Paul, who has hope for the future.